On a freezing winter night in 1910, a small group of strangers stood silently on the edge of a remote island in New York Harbor, staring at a locked laboratory door. Inside, they believed, lay the secret that could either save millions of lives or unleash one of the most dangerous medical disasters in American history. The wind howled across the waters surrounding North Brother Island, a narrow strip of land tucked quietly between the Bronx and Rikers Island. Few Americans today remember its name, yet in the early 20th century it was one of the most feared places in the United States. It was here, hidden from the bustling life of New York City, that people carrying dangerous infectious diseases were isolated from the rest of society. Among them was a woman whose story would become one of the most controversial and astonishing medical cases in history: Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary. Mary Mallon was not what anyone would have expected. Born in Ireland in 1869, she emigrated to the United States as a teenager, chasing the same dream as millions of others: a better life. She settled in New York City and found work as a cook for wealthy families. By all accounts, she was skilled, disciplined, and proud of her work. Cooking was not just her job, it was her identity. But unknown to her, Mary carried within her a silent and deadly threat. In the early 1900s, typhoid fever was one of the most feared diseases in America. It spread through contaminated food and water, causing high fever, weakness, abdominal pain, and often death. Public health systems were still developing, and outbreaks could devastate entire communities. In the summer of 1906, a wealthy family renting a house in Oyster Bay, New York, fell mysteriously ill. One by one, members of the household developed symptoms of typhoid fever. This was unusual. Typhoid was typically associated with poor sanitation, not affluent homes. The family hired a sanitary engineer named George Soper to investigate. Soper was methodical, curious, and relentless. He began tracing every possible source of contamination: water supply, sewage systems, food deliveries. Nothing seemed out of place. Then he noticed something peculiar. Just weeks before the outbreak, a new cook had been hired. Her name was Mary Mallon. Soper dug deeper. He discovered that wherever Mary had worked, outbreaks of typhoid fever seemed to follow. In household after household, people fell sick shortly after she arrived. Yet Mary herself never showed any symptoms. This was nearly unheard of at the time. The concept of an asymptomatic carrier, someone who carries and spreads a disease without ever becoming ill, was not widely understood. If Soper's theory was correct, Mary Mallon was one of the first known cases in the United States. Determined to prove his hypothesis, Soper approached Mary and asked her to provide samples for testing. Mary's reaction was immediate and fierce. She refused, insulted, and outraged at the accusation. To her, the idea that she was responsible for making people sick was absurd and deeply offensive. Soper persisted, but Mary fled. The situation escalated when public health authorities became involved. Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker, a pioneering public health physician, was tasked with tracking Mary down. Baker understood the seriousness of the situation. If Mary truly was a carrier, she posed a significant threat to public health. After a tense search, Mary was located and confronted. She resisted violently, refusing to cooperate. It took police intervention to detain her and bring her to North Brother Island. There, in isolation, tests confirmed what Soper had suspected all along. Mary Mallon was indeed carrying the bacteria that caused typhoid fever. But this discovery raised a troubling question. What should be done with her? Mary had committed no crime. She had never knowingly harmed anyone, yet she was linked to multiple outbreaks and several deaths. Releasing her could endanger countless lives. Authorities made a controversial decision. Mary would be quarantined indefinitely. For the next 3 years, Mary lived alone on a small cottage on North Brother Island. She was allowed minimal contact with others, and her days were marked by isolation and frustration. She insisted she was innocent, a victim of misunderstanding and injustice. In 1910, after years of confinement and growing public debate, Mary was finally released, but under strict conditions. She was ordered never to work as a cook again. At first, it seemed like a resolution. Mary found work as a laundress, a job that paid significantly less but posed less risk to public health. For a time, she lived quietly, staying out of the spotlight. But life was not easy. Cooking had been her livelihood, her skill, her pride. As a laundress, she struggled financially. The temptation to return to her old profession grew stronger. Eventually, Mary made a decision that would change everything. She began working as a cook again, but under assumed names. For several years, she moved between jobs, avoiding detection. Then, in 1915, a major outbreak of typhoid fever struck the Sloan Maternity Hospital in Manhattan. Doctors and nurses were the victims. Panic spread quickly. Once again, investigators were called in, and once again, a familiar pattern emerged. The cook had recently been hired. Her name, they soon discovered, was an alias. It was Mary Mallon. Authorities moved swiftly. Mary was arrested and returned to North Brother Island. There, this time, permanently. For the next 23 years, she would remain there, living out the rest of her life in isolation. But Mary's story is more than just a tale of disease and quarantine. It is a story that raises profound questions about science, ethics, and the balance between individual rights and public safety. At the time of her confinement, medical knowledge was still evolving. The idea of asymptomatic carriers challenged existing beliefs about disease transmission. Mary's case forced public health officials to rethink how illnesses spread and how to control them. Yet the way she was treated sparked controversy. Was it fair to imprison a woman who had never been sick, who had never intended harm? Some argued that Mary was a victim of discrimination. As an Irish immigrant and a working-class woman, she may have been treated more harshly than others in similar situations. After all, there were other known carriers of typhoid fever who were not subjected to lifelong quarantine. Others believed that the authorities had no choice. Mary had repeatedly refused to cooperate, ignored warnings, and continued working in a role that put others at risk. The debate continues to this day. During her years on North Brother Island, Mary's life settled into a quiet routine. She was eventually allowed to work in a laboratory on the island, assisting with medical research. It was a strange twist of fate. Once feared as a source of disease, she now contributed to the study of it. Visitors were rare, but journalists occasionally came to hear her story. Mary remained defiant, insisting she had been wronged. She never fully accepted the scientific explanation of her condition. In 1932, Mary suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. She spent her final years in increasing isolation. On November 11, 1938, Mary Mallon died at the age of 69. An autopsy revealed that her gallbladder still contained the bacteria responsible for typhoid fever, confirming once and for all the reality of her condition. Today, Mary Mallon's story is often revisited in discussions about public health, especially during times of global disease outbreaks. Her case highlights the challenges of managing infectious diseases in a way that respects both individual freedoms and collective safety. It also serves as a reminder of how far medical science has come. In the early 1900s, the idea of invisible carriers was groundbreaking. Today, it's a fundamental concept in epidemiology. Modern tools, vaccines, antibiotics, advanced diagnostics have transformed how we understand and control diseases. Yet the ethical dilemmas remain. How do we respond to individuals who unknowingly pose a risk to others? Where do we draw the line between personal liberty and public responsibility? And how do we ensure that decisions are guided by fairness, compassion, and science?